Hi, boys and girls. Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend. So, today we just want to recap Egypt. So, we've been looking through your projects. They're looking really good so far. Thank you for putting so much time and effort into those. But one of the things that we know happens with projects like that is that we whittle it down so small for you to study your particular characteristics in your particular Egypt, and we lose sight of the whole big picture of ancient times with ancient civilizations. So today is a way to kind of try and help us realize the bigger picture. We're just going to go ahead and recap Egypt a little bit today. So you've read your book, Chapter 3, Section 3, which has so much information. You thought about going through that again, but you've already done that. You've read that. You've looked that over. So that's kind of done. And we also want to realize we're moving on this week to India and China. So what does that look like in comparison to Egypt? And again, why are we studying these ancient cultures? You should know, boys and girls, that some of the things that we do today, some of the words that we have today, come from these ancient civilizations. So we are getting information and meaning from them from all those years ago. So, boys and girls, I first want to start off with the geohistogram. So I'm going to X out right now so that you can see the whole geohistogram. And this is us right now, 2021, 2021, and we are in North America, the Americas. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to show you what we are learning right here. We are in studying Egypt. Okay, we are before zero. The CE BCE line is zero in our Gregorian calendar timeline. Okay, so we are studying the time before zero. So when you see dates, they're either labeled as BCE or BC as you're studying Egypt. They've broken it down. It existed for such a long time that historians broke it down into old, mid, and new. And you can see that here labeled on the geohistogram. And in the video clip I'm about to show you, they'll talk about that old, mid, and new and how they decipher those three different time periods to make it easier to study and understand. But you can see that we're talking about the time before zero. Also, I want you to notice that when you were in the we are in the region of Africa, the continent of Africa, frankly, and so that is because we were studying Egypt. Also, at this very same time, we have other civilizations that are prospering as well. We have Babylon, we have the Sumers, we have the Indus River Valley, and we have China. Okay, I'm just grouping all of us for China right now. These are the different um, dynasties of China, but I'll just categorize it as China right now. So, in different parts of the world at the very same time, there are other civilizations that are prospering as well. Later this week, you guys have the honor to study the Indus River Valley and China a little bit. And I say study, we'll get an overview of those two. Then we can see that the Indus River Valley is in Asia, but south, central, and south, that's India region. And then we can see East Asia is China. And so these are the next things that we'll be studying. And we can see again, I just want to show you in the world at the very same time that Egypt is happening, so are other civilizations. Did they know that each other existed? Probably not. But they were still prospering and doing well. So keep that in mind as we go through this movie. And then, speaking of these different regions of the world, I want you to go ahead and go over to this map. So I'm going to go ahead and make this big. And you can see here that we have the continent of Africa right here. So I want you to see that we have Africa right here, right? Okay, this whole area is the continent of Africa. This right here is Egypt. Okay, so we're in Egypt right here. This is modern Egypt, and we can see that then it's connected right here. This is continuing to be Egypt, and then we get into Israel and Jordan and then Saudi Arabia. Okay, so some people don't realize that Egypt is connected, right? Or excuse me, Africa slash Egypt is connected right here. They don't realize that. And then this is the Red Sea, and this is the Mediterranean Sea. This right here, boys and girls, starting in Lake Victoria, is the Nile River. Now, my drawing pen is not great. My skill level here is not great, but you can see that this is the Nile River. It it ends in the Mediterranean Sea. So this is considered Upper Nile and Upper Egypt, and this is considered lower. And that is because this empties into the Mediterranean Sea. This is the way the river flows in this direction, going this way. So you might have seen that in your Chapter 3, there was a map in there that was great. You probably saw that there, and then you were able to notice that the river flows in that direction. And so this is the area that we are talking about right here when we say Lower Egypt or the Lower Nile. Here's another little map. This was just for fun. I thought this is kind of cool. They showed some different things that would be happening in ancient Egypt along the river valley. Of course, we know that the Nile was the reason why Egypt could exist. The reason why Egypt could exist was because of the river valley. Boys and girls, we're going to see in the video, and you probably already know this, Egypt is a dry, hot place. And so to survive, there had to be some water source for the growth of crops, for drinking, for making things, and so forth. So we can see that the river kept the Egyptians alive and prospering, not only for food and not only for drink, but also for transportation, and which would include trade, which would include getting goods from one spot to another. We're going to see that in the movie as well. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about where we're talking about in the world, and also the river that we can see it flows in this direction and exits into the Mediterranean Sea. And let's just take a look over here real quick. So that is back to the geohistogram. That's why you're seeing, oops, I have to take this off. I forget how to do that. So that is why we see Egypt and Africa. We sometimes forget, a lot of times people will categorize Egypt with Middle East, but it's on the continent of Africa. Okay, so today we're going to go ahead and answer your question. You've already answered that, and so we just saw that, and I did that for you right now. So if you didn't have that right, you can switch that around in your Google Classroom later on after the end of this movie. And we're going to go ahead and go through this movie, boys and girls. And this movie right here, I just wanted to come on for a minute. So this movie is going to kind of go down through just what you guys did in your projects. You broke Egypt down into saying, I know it's a civilization because it talks about religion, it talks about cities, it talks about government and law, it talks about the specialization of jobs, it talks about, oh, let's see what else. Did I say, oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Writing. And then, so in this case, it'd be hieroglyphics. And then, because we're talking about specifically Egypt for writing. And then we have government and law. And then we have complex technologies. And so, this movie, I'm going to stop it and pause it and speak over the movie a little bit because I want to point those things out, what you guys have been doing throughout your project, but maybe an isolated area. So you were only talking about government and law, and you've lost sight of what specialization might look like, or you've lost sight of what the religion would be, or maybe you're just forgetting those things. So this movie will hopefully bring this back to you. Okay, guys, to go ahead, I'm going to X out so you guys can see the whole movie, and then we will watch this together.
Hey, kids! I bet you've heard the expression, or maybe even the song, walk like an Egyptian, walk like an Egyptian. It's simple. You put one hand behind you, down low, pointing backwards, and one hand in front. Then you strut. Can you?
So, boys and girls, I was going to clip this part of the movie, but I thought with Miss Richards doing her rendition of Walking Like an Egyptian, I thought maybe you guys would want to practice that too. So perhaps at the end of this movie, your crew teachers would allow you to practice walking like an Egyptian now that you know exactly how to do it. Maybe there'd even be some music involved. Who knows?
You walk like an Egyptian? It's hard to imagine that the ancient Egyptians really walked that way. But however they did walk, no ancient culture captures our imagination quite like the Egyptians do. So, just what was ancient Egypt? And when did they live? Well, let's start by defining some terms. An ancient civilization is a society that existed a long time ago, that had a spectacular rise and fall, and then became a model for future societies. In modern times, we have advanced technology, transportation, big stores, lots of schools and roads. But all of that had to start somewhere. Most of the ideas that led to many of the conveniences we have in modern life began during ancient times.
So, boys and girls, are calling to your attention that why do we study ancient civilizations? This is just one of the reasons, because where did our ideas come from? Why do we do what we do? Why do we have what we have? How have we modified things through time? And this is just giving an example.
Some of the other ancient civilizations that you may have heard of include the ancient Greeks, Romans, the Persians, Mayans, Aztec, and Incas. These groups were all
We'll be studying some of those as well coming up in the next few weeks, so you have that to look forward to as well.
from different places in the world and all left behind different but equally memorable architecture, art, teachings, and other parts of culture that made them unique. We owe almost all our ideas and the way we look at the world itself to these ancient civilizations. Out of all the ancient societies, the ancient Egyptian civilization is one of the most successful, having lasted almost 3,000 years. That's more than 10 times the number of years that the United States has even existed. So, what are the first things that pop into your mind when you think about the ancient Egyptian civilization? Let me guess: pyramids, King Tut, their cool gods, Cleopatra, mummies, the Sphinx, all of the above? There is a lot to unpack when it comes to ancient Egypt, so let's dive right in. First, it's important to know where in the world the ancient Egyptians set up shop. They were here, right along the banks of the Nile River in what is now northern Africa. Being close to the Nile River was critical to the ancient Egyptians, as a reliable water source is a big part of a culture's success. You gotta have drinking water, right? You need water for your crops, and rivers are full of fish to eat. Rivers are great for transportation, and it didn't hurt that access to the Nile quickly took them into the open sea so they could trade and travel. The Nile is so long, almost 4,000 miles, that the thriving society that ancient Egyptians set up along its banks ultimately influenced the growth of other African countries far to the south, such as Kenya, Eritrea, Uganda, Tanzania, and others. Almost all the famous sites that the ancient Egyptians left behind line the banks of this storied river, and it's the Nile that we can basically thank for this great civilization. The Nile flows all the way from down here at Lake Victoria, one of the largest lakes in the world, up through Africa into Egypt, and then it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. That's some river! Because weather was bone dry and
Boys and girls are going to talk about how the weather was dry and how they had to rely on the river. But remembering the question we posed to you before, we asked you about the impact of geography on the success of a civilization. I think in this case, we could look and say, I don't want to speak for you, but if we take the Nile away and we look at this picture that's on our screen right now, which is a dry and barren deserty area, if we take the Nile away, do we think that we have a successful ancient civilization like Egypt that lasted for 3,000 years, built pyramids, grew crops, had civilized and not civilized so much, I should say, organized cities? So just keep that in mind and be thinking about that as we move through this.
in Egypt with very little rain. It was the Nile flooding every year that allowed the Egyptians to plant crops, irrigate the soil, and have food. Plus, it provided fish and birds and other food sources that allowed the Egyptians to thrive. One of the most famous and important crops that the Egyptians grew was a reed called papyrus, which was used to make paper. In fact, the word papyrus is where we get the word paper from. Papyrus reeds could grow to be 16 feet tall. That's almost 3 times the size of a small adult. But ancient Egypt was not just one time period. It lasted so long that historians have had to break it down into 3 separate kingdoms: Old, Middle, and new. Not super creative, but it tells you all you need to know. Each of those kingdoms was further broken down into dynasties. A
Mm.
dynasty was a time in which the civilization was ruled by a specific family or group of leaders. You even hear that word today. Like when a sports team wins a lot of championships in a row, we call it a dynasty. So here's a quick and easy way to remember the three kingdoms of Egypt. The Old Kingdom lasted from about 2575 BCE to 2150 BCE. This kingdom was known as the Age of Pyramids, when the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. Ever wonder how they built those things? It's not like you can lift rocks weighing several tons. This was a prosperous time where trade and art were flourishing. They built ships, and the art created here was imitated for the next 3,000 years. The Middle Kingdom lasted from 1975 BCE to 1640 BCE. During this kingdom, all of Egypt was unified under a pharaoh, a word that meant great house in their ancient language. During this time, the capital of Egypt moved from Memphis, no, not the one in Tennessee, to Thebes. The army expanded, the economy boomed, and they started making large block statues. And the use of papyrus to write down stories really took off. This was the beginning of storytelling. The New Kingdom started about 1520 BCE and lasted until 1075 BCE. This was the golden age of wealth, prosperity, and power. Maybe it's because they had a 10-year-old become king during this period. No, seriously. A 10-year-old named Ahmose the First united the kingdom around 1540 BCE. That's a lot of power for a 10-year-old and a lot of pressure. Other famous kings during this period were Ramses II, Thutmose III, and the most famous of all, King Tutankhamun, or King Tut. After that, it was all downhill for the Egyptians. Famine, drought, and invasions from the sea people of Libya started their decline. Eventually, their last pharaoh was Ramses the 11th, and in about 650 BCE, the Assyrians took over. So, what was life like for them? When it came
Boys and girls, I first just want to call back your attention to government and law. We see that there were pharaohs that were in charge. We're going to see sprinkled throughout this video, continuing on, that there must have been organization because things were organized. So, who organized those things and made things organized would be government and law. So, the pharaohs were in charge. They had people working underneath them to help organize things like cities and the building of the pyramids, for example, including growing crops. So, just noticing that was one of the things that we talked about as a characteristic of a civilization.
came to their homes, there was a definite difference in where you lived based on how much money you had. The nobles, the upper class, and the leaders typically had big houses with up to 30 rooms along the Nile River, while peasants and lower classes had smaller houses that were much closer together. All of the houses were made from bricks that they invented, fashioned from mud and straw. Because the weather was so dry, these houses were quite sturdy. Not only was it dry, but it was also hot in Egypt, and it still is today. So the clothes they wore were loose fitting. Men mostly sported short kilts over top loincloths, and the women wore straight dresses. Servants were distinguished from the others by wearing patterned fabrics, and the children went naked until about 5 or 6. There was no sunscreen, so it must have been hard to avoid getting sunburned. Like in
Okay, boys and girls, I just want to show you again, they're touching on the social structure with the houses and the clothes. So, different people would wear different clothes, and different people would live in different types of housing in a different location in the city, depending on your status in that social system.
in modern Egypt, they ate a lot of bread, fruits, vegetables, and lamb and goat for meat. Their fruits were things like dates, plums, figs, grapes, raisins, and melons, while their vegetables included onions, leeks, beans, lettuce, and others. They had a very healthy diet. Just like we do today, they also made beer from barley and wine from grapes or plums. Most people during ancient Egypt worked as farmers because the land near the Nile was so fertile and they needed to grow their own food. Other jobs included craftsmen like potters, weavers, jewelry makers, and carpenters. Some more educated and wealthier people were also scribes, meaning they wrote things down on papyrus using hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics was an ancient language using symbols to represent words. Archaeologists have discovered a lot of hieroglyphics in the ancient tombs of Egypt. If your name was
So that is an example of writing style, the hieroglyphics. You can see those different examples there, as well as, excuse me, the specialization of different jobs. So they give you quite a bit of a list of some different jobs that would have been possible in ancient Egypt, especially being a scribe or those different merchant types they talked about.
was a hieroglyphic, what would it look like? Mine would be a guy reading into a microphone. Kids in ancient Egypt were well treated, with girls getting preferential treatment since boys were considered troublemakers. All kids were encouraged to become strong and athletic through gameplay. Hey, that sounds fun, doesn't it? Well, not so fast. Life wasn't that easy for kids in ancient Egypt. Because of disease and wild animals all around, almost half the kids didn't live past the age of 5. If they did survive, they were considered adults by age 13. I guess if you made it that far, you earned it. Of course, any video about ancient Egypt wouldn't be complete without mentioning their gods, which included Ra, the sun god, Isis, the mother goddess, Osiris, who was the goddess of the dead, Horus, the god of the sky, and Thoth, the god of knowledge.
Oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. It got a little blurry here, but I wanted to show you how I talked about earlier walking like an Egyptian, and you see a lot of the Egyptian art where the faces are a profile, and that is thought to be because it was just simply easier for them to draw profile pictures versus straight on pictures, including with their arms. So, just a little food for thought, a little tidbit.
Now that you know so much about ancient Egypt, do you feel a little bit like Thoth? Now a staple of our modern day Halloween, mummies were a big part of the ancient Egypt culture too. They preserved bodies after they died by wrapping them up and embalming them. They believed in the afterlife, so creating mummies was a way to prepare them for what lay ahead.
Okay, so that's the religion component, right? So they had the different pyramids and the different tombs and the mummification based upon the religious beliefs and what they thought would happen. And of course, all the gods go with the religion as well.
Some of the most famous mummies preserved to this day are those of King Tut and King Ramses the Great. There may have been as many as 70 million mummies created during the 3,000 years. Hey, that's like 23,000 mummies a year. Last, but definitely not least, are the Egyptian pyramids. Those giant, amazing structures that still exist today. They were used as memorials and burial places for the pharaohs. Because of their belief in the afterlife, the pyramids were used to store treasure, food, religious artifacts, texts, and more. Everything you'd need to be transported to the next life. They were even buried with a mummified pet on occasion. The largest pyramid built was a whopping 480 feet tall, and it could take thousands of workers 20 years to build just one. Totally worth it. So that's ancient Egypt in a nutshell. An amazing, colorful, and wildly successful civilization that left so much behind that we still cherish today. Archaeologists are still discovering more about these ancient peoples all the time, and there are many mysteries to uncover. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time to walk like an Egyptian over to the fridge for a
Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. So you got a little bit of visualization about ancient Egypt and hopefully wrapped everything together. So it's a little bit more clear to you, makes a little bit more sense, and is a little bit more, I don't know, interesting. So thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention to Egypt today. Make sure to correct your question of the day if you need to, and finish um, your reflection after this video. And we will see you back tomorrow. Thank you very much.